democracy works for Africa? And I'm asking this question because some of individuals like Thomas Sankara and Patrice Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah, like individuals who wanted good things for their people and their nations, they ended up being removed from the positions of power. And most of the times, it's usually the West who are doing that. And we can all agree that conflict is a huge industry, especially for Western countries, right? When it comes to Africa and taking resources from the continent. Should Africa have a different governing system?
First of all, let us understand the state and status of the post-colonial African state. These are neo-colonial states which were created with the intention that they should not function. I urge you and your audience to read a book written by Adeke Adebajo, The Curse of Berlin, Africa After the Cold War. The Berlin Project was one of the most diabolical projects ever undertaken against any people, dividing us into little countries, and how some given to France, who now call themselves Francophone, some given to the Portuguese, now call themselves Lusophone, some given to the British, calling themselves Anglophone, and complete with organizations which have been created deliberately to ensure that those divisions are alive and well. So it is true that governance system is manipulated. People like Kwame Nkrumah were overthrown through the machinations of the United States of America and the United Kingdom. Patrice Emery Lumumba was also assassinated and removed from power through the machinations of the Americans and the Belgians. And we know many of them have been the victims of this kind of manipulation. Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara was removed through Blaise Compaoré, through the activities of France. We know all these. And they do that because they want to have their puppets in place. And that is the reason why some of us believe that a Pan-African and a united Africa will make sure that we are not susceptible to the activities of these diabolical imperialists. So, which brings me to the question that you've asked, democracy. What is democracy? I mean, the thing that we call democracy has been exported to us and embraced to us means that we have multi-party elections, that we have periodic elections. I no longer use the word democracy, I use the word governance. And I have no doubt in my mind that Africa needs to rethink governance. Governance that will ensure that the people are involved in electing the people who serve them, a governance that will ensure that we have structures of accountability for those who have the honor and privilege of serving their people. If we do that and use whatever term that we want, not necessarily democracy, will create systems that are sustainable. You will have noted in many African countries, immediately after the elections, then there is conflict. Because we have created a system where those who win the elections or those who lose the elections can't agree. Those who lose the elections will always claim that the elections were rigged or stolen. So this idea of creating a political system which is conflictual is not in the best interest of Africa. Africa must rethink, and there must not be any one size fits all. What will be suitable in Nigeria may not necessarily be suitable in Ghana. It may have its own nuances, but there is one golden thread that must pass through it, that the people must be involved in determining who are going to serve them. Once we do that, then we will have an Africa where there is sustainable and sustained leadership that will ensure that the continent grows politically, economically, and otherwise.
Either when people start thinking and they say that we deserve better, or when they're hungry. Which one do you think is for African youth right now?
You know, Kwame Nkrumah used to say that people are telling us to wait for history to evolve. He said, no, we must inject a revolutionary favor in the wheels of history. And circumstances create revolution. It is not, you must not wait until you are hungry. You must not wait until you are angry and hungry. You must not wait for the iron to be hot. You must heat the iron so that it becomes hot. So you must be a master of your own destiny, and you must not allow situation to degenerate, because the changes are evolutionary and you've got to anticipate change. 2 weeks ago, over 2 weeks ago, I was listening to the Chinese when they were holding their national congress, which brings together in Beijing 6,000 delegates drawn from the entire China. And it takes a whole year to prepare it. The Western press, who normally want to think that China is not saying anything positive, say it is a rubber stamp. No, it is not. Those fellows were engaged in serious discussion on how China is going to relate with the world 100 years from thence. So you cannot afford the luxury of thinking in circles of 5 years. You can break the implementation into circles of 5 years, but the thinking must be grand and intergenerational. And that is what I want to see. How are we going to deal with our economies? How are we going to earn the dividends of the fourth industrial revolution? How are we going to use and derive the benefits of artificial intelligence? How are we going to engage in smart agriculture? How are we going to engage in education? How are we going to engage in all the critical areas in our lives that are going to change the circumstances of this continent so that we are able to compete? We are talking about climate change. We are talking about clean energy. We are talking about all these things transiting from fossil fuel into what they call clean energy. Are we going to begin to make cars in this continent? Are we going to begin to make medical equipment in this continent? Are we going to begin to make furniture in a manner that can't be sold in this continent? Are we going to improve our textile industry? That requires forward planning. And that is what our current African governments are not concerned with. Because as somebody once said, Africa is full of politicians who are thinking of the next election rather than statesmen who should be thinking about the next generation. And it is the duty of young people to now apply pressure in an organized manner with the firmness and clarity that will open the eyes of these so-called leaders to ensure that Africa can compete with other civilizations wherever they are.